What happens when a war-weary sheriff and a proud Apache chief forge an impossible peace, only to discover that their greatest test isn't keeping their enemies apart, but protecting the one person both their peoples have abandoned? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and prepare yourself for a story that will change everything you thought you knew about frontier justice. My name is Ezekiel Thornfield, and I've been wearing this star for 12 years now. 12 years of keeping the peace in Copper Ridge, a town that shouldn't exist but does, carved out of red rock and stubborn hope in the New Mexico territory. Today, I'm about to do something that could either save this place or get us all killed. The morning sun cast long shadows across the mesa as I rode toward the meeting point, a weathered stone formation the Apache call Bia, the rock that listens. My horse, a sturdy bay named General, picked his way carefully through the scattered boulders. The weight of my Colt 45 felt heavier than usual against my hip, though I prayed I wouldn't need to draw it today. 3 months ago, everything changed. Cattle started disappearing from the ranches outside town, and the territorial governor sent word that he was considering bringing in the cavalry. That would mean war, and I'd seen enough war to last 3 lifetimes. During the rebellion, I'd watched boys die in trenches for causes they barely understood. I wasn't about to let that happen to Copper Ridge. So I did something unprecedented. I sent word to Chief Nalnish that I wanted to talk. The Apache camp materialized before me like a mirage becoming real. Wickiups dotted the landscape, their brush and hide construction blending seamlessly with the desert. Warriors watched me approach, their faces unreadable, rifles held loose but ready. I raised my right hand, palm forward, in the universal sign of peaceful intent. Chief Nalnish emerged from the largest Wickiup, and I was struck again by his commanding presence. Tall and lean, with silver-streaked hair braided with eagle feathers, he carried himself with the dignity of a man who had never bowed to anyone. His dark eyes assessed me as I dismounted. "Sheriff Thornfield," he said in accented but clear English, "you have come far from your wooden buildings." "Chief Nalnish," I replied, removing my hat, "thank you for agreeing to meet." We faced each other across 20 feet of desert floor, 2 men from different worlds trying to find common ground. Behind him, I noticed a young woman partially hidden in the shadows of a Wickiup. She had the classic Apache features, but something about her seemed different. Sadder, perhaps. "You speak of peace," the chief continued, "but your people take our hunting grounds. They dig holes in the sacred earth seeking yellow metal. What peace can exist when respect does not?" I'd prepared for this question during many sleepless nights. "You're right, Chief. My people have taken much. But killing each other won't bring back what's lost. It'll only create more graves." The chief's weathered face remained impassive. "And what do you propose, lawman?" "A boundary," I said, pulling a hand-drawn map from my saddlebag. "The territorial government doesn't have to know the details. Your people stay east of Copper Creek. My people stay west. No more raids, no more cavalry threats. We trade fairly at the neutral ground by the old mission ruins." For long minutes, Chief Nalnish studied the map. The wind whispered through the rocks, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Finally, he looked up. "You offer much, Sheriff, but peace requires trust. How do I know your word is stronger than the wind?" I'd anticipated this too. Reaching into my vest, I pulled out something that made several warriors shift nervously. My father's war medal from the Mexican conflict. It was the most valuable thing I owned, not for its metal, but for its meaning. "This belonged to my father," I said, offering it to him. "He died believing that sometimes a man has to choose between what's easy and what's right. I'm choosing what's right." Chief Nalnish examined the medal, his fingers tracing the worn bronze. When he looked up, something had shifted in his expression. "Your father fought against my people's enemies," he said quietly. Perhaps his son can fight against war itself." We spent the next 2 hours hammering out details. Trading posts, water rights, dispute resolution. mundane details that could mean the difference between peace and bloodshed. As we talked, I noticed the young woman I'd seen earlier moving closer, her eyes fixed on our conversation with an intensity that surprised me. When we finally stood to clasp hands, sealing our agreement, Chief Nalnish gestured toward her. "Sheriff Thornfield, this is my daughter, Ayana." She stepped forward, and I was struck by her beauty, not just physical, though she was lovely, but something deeper. An intelligence in her dark eyes, a strength in her bearing despite what looked like recent sorrow. "An honor," I said, touching my hat brim. She nodded but didn't speak. Something passed between her father and her, a look heavy with unspoken meaning. "Ayana has been—" The chief paused, choosing his words carefully. "Rejected by a suitor from the Mescalero band. She brings shame to our people by refusing to accept this judgment." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert wind. In Apache culture, I knew such rejection could be devastating, even dangerous. "She is strong-willed," Chief Nalnish continued, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "Too strong for some men, but strength can become weakness when it stands alone." The implication hung in the desert air like smoke from a distant fire. Ayana's eyes met mine briefly, and in that moment, I saw something I recognized, the look of someone who'd lost everything and was trying to figure out how to keep living. "Chief," I said carefully, "our agreement speaks of mutual protection and respect. Does that extend to all members of both our peoples?" His weathered face creased into what might have been the beginning of a smile. "A wise question, Sheriff, perhaps wiser than either of us knows." As I mounted General for the ride back to town, I carried with me more than just a peace treaty. I carried the weight of a promise I wasn't sure I understood yet, and the memory of dark eyes that held secrets I was only beginning to glimpse. The sun was setting behind the mesa when Copper Ridge came into view, its wooden buildings looking small and fragile against the vast landscape. I'd accomplished what I set out to do. I'd bought us peace. But as I'd learned in the war, sometimes peace comes with a price you don't discover until it's too late to change your mind. What I didn't know was that 3 days later everything would change, and the test of our treaty wouldn't come from raiders or cavalry charges, but from a desperate choice that would force me to decide what kind of man I really was. Chapter 2. 3 days later, the peace felt as fragile as morning frost. I was finishing my evening rounds when Minerva Colstead burst through the door of my office, her usually composed demeanor shattered. "Sheriff Thornfield," she gasped, clutching her shawl. "There's someone at my boarding house. She's hurt and she's—" "Slow down, Minnie," I said, rising from my desk. "Who's hurt?" "An Indian woman," she whispered, glancing toward the window as if expecting to be overheard. "She's asking for you specifically, says you'll understand why she's here." My blood chilled. Even before I grabbed my hat and followed Minerva through the dusty streets, I knew who it had to be. The question was why Ayana had come to town, and what had happened to bring her here after dark, clearly in distress. Minerva's boarding house sat at the quieter end of Main Street, a 2-story frame building that had seen better days but remained respectable. She led me through the back entrance, up a narrow staircase to a small room under the eaves. Ayana sat on the edge of a simple bed, her buckskin dress torn at the shoulder, a dark bruise marking her left cheek. She looked up when I entered, and the relief in her eyes hit me like a physical blow. "Sheriff Thornfield," she said in careful English. I prayed you were a man of honor." I knelt beside the bed, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "What happened to you?" Her hands trembled as she touched the bruise on her face. "The Mescalero suitor, Delche. He would not accept my father's judgment. He came with 3 warriors to our camp tonight. They said if I would not come willingly as his wife, they would take me by force and claim I had agreed. The rage that welled up in me was swift and hot. I'd seen too many women suffer at the hands of men who thought strength gave them the right to take what they wanted. Did your father—" "My father was away, hunting with the other men," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "Only the women and children were in camp. I fought them, but—" She gestured to her torn dress. I escaped into the desert. I remembered your words about mutual protection. I came to ask if they were true or just wind. Minerva, who had been standing in the doorway, stepped forward. Sheriff, Thaddeus Grimm saw her arrive. He's already stirring up talk at the saloon about savages in our midst. You know how he feels about the treaty. I did know. Thaddeus Grimm owned the largest general store in town and had interests in several mining claims. He'd opposed the peace agreement from the beginning, claiming it would hurt business and make us look weak to other tribes. He'd been looking for any excuse to break it. Ayana, I said, turning back to her, you're safe here tonight, but I need to know, what do you want to happen next? She met my eyes directly, and I saw in them the same strength I'd noticed during our first meeting, tempered now by vulnerability and fear. I want to choose my own path, she said simply. In your world or mine, but by my choice. The agreement you made with my father, does it protect a woman's right to choose or only men's right to make war? Before I could answer, heavy footsteps echoed on the stairs, followed by raised voices. Minerva cursed under her breath. That'll be Grimm, she muttered. With half the saloon behind him, I'd wager. Through the thin walls, I could hear Thaddeus Grimm's booming voice. Can't have Indians taking refuge in our town. It's a violation of everything decent folk stand for. I stood, my hand instinctively moving to my gun belt. Minerva, lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me. Sheriff, Ayana said, rising as well. If my presence brings trouble to your people, your presence doesn't bring trouble, I interrupted. Men like Grimm bring trouble. There's a difference. I stepped into the hallway to find 6 men crowding the narrow space. Grimm stood at their head, his red face gleaming with sweat and whiskey courage. Behind him, I recognized several of the town's more vocal malcontents. Sheriff, Grimm said, his voice carrying the false reasonableness of a man trying to sound rational while planning something ugly. We've come to escort our uninvited guest back where she belongs. She's under my protection, I replied calmly. She's asked for sanctuary, and she's gotten it. Sanctuary, Grimm laughed, but there was no humor in it. This is a Christian town, Sheriff. We don't owe sanctuary to heathens who can't follow their own people's customs. One of the other men, a miner named Chuck Delaney, spat tobacco juice on Minerva's clean floor. Heard tell she ran out on a wedding. That makes her damaged goods, even by Indian standards. The urge to plant my fist in Delaney's face was almost overwhelming, but I forced myself to remain calm. Violence now would only prove Grimm's point about the treaty being a mistake. Gentlemen, I said, my voice carrying the authority of 12 years wearing a badge, you're trespassing in a private establishment. I suggest you return to your drinking and let me handle the law. The law? Grimm stepped closer, and I could smell the whiskey on his breath. What law protects runaway squaws? Show me that statute, Sheriff. That's when I realized the true test of the treaty had arrived. Not armies facing each other across a battlefield, but people standing in a narrow hallway, deciding whether fear and prejudice would overcome the promise of something better. The law of common decency, I said quietly, and my authority as the duly appointed sheriff of this territory. Now step aside. For a moment that stretched like eternity, Grimm and I stared at each other. Behind him, the other men shifted nervously, suddenly uncertain about the wisdom of confronting an armed lawman in a confined space. Finally, Grimm smiled, a cold, calculating expression that told me this confrontation was far from over. Of course, Sheriff, he said smoothly. We respect the law here, but come morning folks will have questions. Questions about whether a man who protects Indian interests over white ones is really the right man to wear that star. After they left, I stood alone in the hallway, listening to their boots clatter down the stairs and out into the night. Through the door, I could hear Minerva's voice, low and soothing, comforting Ayana. I'd wanted to create peace between two peoples. Instead, I'd created a situation where I might have to choose between honoring my word and keeping my job, possibly my life. But as I thought about the courage it had taken for Ayana to ride alone through the desert night to ask for help, I realized that some choices aren't really choices at all. They're tests of what you're really made of. And tomorrow, one way or another, I was going to find out. The Chapter 3, dawn, came too soon and brought with it the sound of hammering. From my office window, I could see what Thaddeus Grimm had been busy with all night, a wooden platform in the center of Main Street, surrounded by a growing crowd of townspeople. I'd spent the sleepless hours walking the streets, thinking about the choice before me: return Ayana to face whatever punishment her Apache suitors had planned, or stand by my principles and risk everything I'd worked to build in Copper Ridge. By sunrise, I knew what I had to do, even if I wasn't sure I'd survive it. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. Reverend Obadiah Whitmore entered, his usually composed demeanor showing cracks of worry. "Ezekiel," he said, using my given name as he only did in the most serious circumstances. "Grimm's called a town meeting. He's demanding a vote of no confidence in your ability to serve as sheriff." Through the window, I watched more people gathering around the platform. Some faces I recognized as reasonable folks, others as those who'd always resented having law and order interfere with their baser impulses. "What's your position, Obadiah?" I asked. The Reverend was quiet for a long moment. "I've been praying on it all night," he finally said. "The good book speaks of welcoming strangers, of protecting the vulnerable. But it also speaks of order, of respecting authority. It speaks of doing what's right when it's hard." I finished for him. He nodded slowly. Yes, it does." At 9 o'clock, I walked across the street to face whatever judgment the town would render. The crowd had grown to include nearly every adult in Copper Ridge. Grimm stood on his makeshift platform like a politician at a rally, his voice carrying across the morning air. "Can't have a sheriff who puts Indian interests above Christian folk," he was saying as I approached. "A man who breaks bread with savages can't be trusted to protect our children." I climbed onto the platform, and the crowd fell silent. For a moment I looked out at faces I'd known for years, store clerks and ranchers, housewives and drifters, all waiting to see what I would say. "Folks," I began, my voice carrying clearly in the still air, "I know why you're here. You're worried about the safety of your families, and that's understandable. But before you make any decisions, I want you to know what really happened." I told them about Ayana's escape from forced marriage, about men who thought violence gave them the right to take what they wanted. I spoke about the treaty and what it meant, not just for Apache and white relations, but for what kind of people we wanted to be. "Now," I concluded, "you can vote me out. That's your right. But if you do, you need to understand what you're really voting for. You're saying that fear matters more than justice, that prejudice is stronger than principle." Grimm stepped forward, his face red with anger. "Pretty words, Sheriff, but words don't stop scalping knives. You've brought danger into our midst for the sake of one Indian woman who couldn't follow her own people's ways." That's when something unexpected happened. Minerva Colstead climbed onto the platform. "Thaddeus Grimm," she said, her voice carrying the authority of a woman who'd raised 5 children and buried 2 husbands. "You speak of danger, but where was this concern when Dolores McCain needed protection from her drunken husband? Where was it when young Sarah Fletcher was being courted by that gambler with wandering hands?" A murmur ran through the crowd. Minerva had touched on something everyone knew, but few had spoken about, that protection of women was often selective, based more on social standing than actual need. "The sheriff's done right by that girl," Minerva continued, "and anyone with eyes can see it. Question is, what kind of town are we? The kind that protects the vulnerable, or the kind that abandons them when it's convenient?" Before Grimm could respond, another voice joined the debate. An old Apache woman emerged from the crowd, moving with dignity despite her advanced years. Behind her walked Chief Nalnish, flanked by 3 warriors. The crowd tensed, hands moving toward weapons, but I stepped forward quickly. "Chief," I said, "you honor us with your presence." Chief Nalnish surveyed the crowd with eyes that missed nothing. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the silent street. "I come because my daughter's fate concerns both our peoples," he said. "The sheriff speaks truly. She fled men who would take by force what should be given freely. In the old ways, before the white man's diseases and wars changed everything, such men would be banished from the tribe." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "But there is more the sheriff does not know. Ayana carries a secret that makes her situation more dangerous than any of us understood." My blood chilled. Beside me, I felt Ayana stiffen. Whatever her father was about to reveal, she hadn't expected it. 3 moons ago, Chief Nalnish continued, Spanish soldiers came to our territory seeking a woman who had escaped from Santa Fe. A woman carrying information about gold shipments, stolen from a corrupt official's ledgers. They described my daughter perfectly, though they called her by another name, Maria Delgado. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. I stared at Ayana, seeing her now with completely new eyes. The sadness I'd noticed, the intelligence, the way she'd seemed different from other Apache women, it all made sense now. "You see," Chief Nalnish said as the crowd quieted, "my daughter was raised in the mission schools, taught Spanish and English. She worked as a clerk in Santa Fe until she discovered documents showing that territorial officials were stealing gold meant for Washington. When she tried to report it, they attempted to silence her permanently. She escaped and returned to our people, but the secret she carries makes her valuable and dangerous." Grimm's face had gone pale. As one of the territory's more prosperous merchants, he would understand the implications immediately. If Ayana Maria could prove corruption at high levels, it would shake the entire territorial government. "So, you see," I said, addressing the crowd, "this isn't just about protecting one woman from an unwanted marriage. It's about protecting someone who risked everything to expose corruption, the kind of corruption that steals from all of us." What happened next surprised everyone, including me. Thaddeus Grimm stepped forward, but instead of continuing his opposition, he removed his hat. I may have spoken hastily," he said, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "If what the chief says is true, then perhaps we have a duty to protect this woman, regardless of her race." Later, I would learn that Grimm had his own reasons for wanting to see certain territorial officials investigated. His mining claims had been mysteriously reassigned to political cronies more than once. The vote, when it came, was overwhelming, not just to keep me as sheriff, but to offer formal sanctuary to Ayana until the corruption investigation could be completed. As the crowd dispersed, Chief Nalnish approached me privately. "Sheriff," he said, "you have honored our agreement beyond what either of us expected. But I must ask, what are your intentions toward my daughter? The way you look at her is not the way a man looks at someone he is merely protecting." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "Chief, she..." For the first time since I'd known him, Chief Nalnish smiled, a genuine expression of warmth and amusement. "Peace, Sheriff. In the old days, such feelings would require formal courtship and many horses. In these new times," he shrugged, "perhaps what matters most is that she chooses freely and that her choice is honored." 6 months later, Ayana's testimony helped convict 3 territorial officials of embezzlement. The scandal reached all the way to Washington and resulted in significant reforms in how territorial governments were supervised. More importantly, she chose to stay in Copper Ridge, not as a refugee seeking protection, but as a woman building a new life. She married me the following spring, in a ceremony that combined Apache traditions with Christian ones, witnessed by both peoples who had learned that peace was not just the absence of war, but the presence of justice. The treaty held. More than that, it grew into something neither Chief Nalnish nor I had dared to imagine. A genuine friendship between communities that had once seen each other as enemies. Sometimes, late at night when I'm making my rounds, I think about that moment on the platform when the town had to choose what kind of people they wanted to be. They chose well, and it made all the difference. But the real lesson wasn't about treaties or politics. It was about something simpler and more profound, that sometimes the most important peace you can make is with your own conscience, and the most valuable thing you can protect is another person's right to choose their own destiny. In the end, that's what law and order really means, not just keeping the peace, but making it possible for decent people to live with dignity and hope. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get to be part of something that proves such things are possible. What did you think of Sheriff Thornfield's journey and the choice that changed everything for Copper Ridge? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of courage, redemption, and the untamed American frontier. Which character's transformation surprised you the most? Let us know where you're watching from.